Welcome to the April 2018 Cloud Community Call. My name is Bob Ballard. I will be your MC for today, as well as one of the primary presenters, along with Jeff Fowler, who we have again to give us our security update, and an assist from Dean Morgan, who will be demoing some of the administration features and capabilities on the Microsoft Teams side. When I was selecting a topic this time, I thought long and hard about whether it was the right thing to do to revisit Teams, since we have done a session on this about 6 or 7 months ago. But I think it's important for a couple of reasons. So number one, our government customers should be seeing this in their tenant any day now, right? So sometime over the next 30 days or so, you should be seeing Teams arrive in some of your tenants. I think it's a rolling release, so it may not all be immediately. That's eminently on the horizon. Second, there's so much that has changed since it was initially released and what it's become that I think it's important to revisit, even for those that are not government customers or that have put off in deploying or rolling out Teams because they were looking for features or capabilities that weren't there. So with that, I'm going to get things kick-started. You already own a team. It's myself, Bob Ballard, Jerry Martin, Aaron Ward, and George Scott, I think are probably both on at this point, as well as Mary Tucker to keep us all in line. And of course, we're all supported by Steve Winter, our vice president. Don't forget, remind everybody that if you have questions on today's topic or any other topics around, strategic thinking around what to do with various technologies, questions about how things work together, or what, Planet's perspective is on anything, feel free to email You Already Own It at go-planet.com. Your entire You Already Own It team will get the email, and we promise to get back to you as soon as we can. You'll at least touch base with you within 24 hours, and if it's a question that we need to search and answer for, we'll get back to you as soon as we possibly can. So today's topic, I tried to do a little half funny take on lions and tigers and bears, oh my. So I said groups, teams, and OneDrive, oh my. I'm not going to talk about OneDrive too much other than occasionally where it references how it fits in between the two technologies. So I just thought a quick framing slide to say, look, the work environment is changing significantly, even in what I would say is our less aggressive technology organizations and some of my tried and true government customers that have often once upon a time looked at me and said they were never going to go to the cloud, for instance. Even there, they're changing, right? People are very familiar and comfortable with social tools. They're using them in their daily lives, right? The workforce is getting more diverse, and even in government, the ability to take on people who are not in the office all the time is rising significantly, right? Across the entire workforce, 72% of people will be working at least part of the time not from home. That number's not quite so high in government. But it is actually, it went from practically 0 5 years ago to significantly more than that today as I talk with my government customers. So when we look at Microsoft Teams, we're talking about really four major pillars we want to talk about, right? The ability to communicate, right? So right now we're on a Skype for Business meeting. Currently, the long-term vision is that infrastructure that still runs this meeting is still there on the back end, but the client for that meeting will become Teams over time. I don't want to alarm anybody. Microsoft's not pulling the Skype for Business experience anytime soon. But as we go through, there is a little more we're going to talk about on that front and how to think about that. Think about collaboration, right? Having, one of the things that has come up a lot as I talk to customers about Teams, or early on, predating before Teams existence, people used to say, so what's the where's the Office 365 client? What application do I use to access that, right? And for a long time, right, it was sort of the portal. We talk about, or, if I'm going to say the client for Office 365 was Office, right? And that's really true. But what it doesn't always do is sort of give you this aggregated view to see all the people that I work with, all the documents and elements that I'm collaborating with, and the ability to sort of one-stop shop around that. And that's really when we start looking at the Teams client. I'm going to demo for you in a little bit. What that is, that's really what the point is here. Another key piece is the ability to customize and extend, right? And what I say by that is if I'm going to have sort of a one-stop landing place for my team collaboration, my ability to chat, the ability to have meetings, do video conferencing, interact with documents, have persistent chat about those conversations, all those things in one place. There are some other business applications that are out there in my environment that theoretically could be really useful to surface into this interface as well. And so, I'm fascinated about how rapidly third-party applications have widgets that have been published for Microsoft Teams right out of the gate. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them already, many of which are not Microsoft products. Then finally, what I think is really important, to all of my customers, but in particular, right, those in the public sector and those commercial customers that have, fairly stringent compliance regulations, that because this solution is built on top of the existing technologies in many ways that are already part of Office 365, right, all of those same controls that you've grown to love are there for you, right? So I have the audit trails. I have the ability to do data retention. These things are just built on top of existing technologies within the tenant. They're just bubbled together as a team for the first time, into one client, right? So I'm going to talk a little bit more really quickly on some of the features. I want to go through this quickly because I also want to demo. But then I got the back half of this conversation really quickly to talk about what do I do with what technology, because I think that framing is super important for you guys to understand, right? So, hey, I can communicate both on a one-to-one, just like essentially, right, the replacement for Skype for Business client. That functionality is baked right into the Teams client today. So all of those things I could do in Skype for Business, I now can also do in the Teams client, as well as persistent chat around these sort of teams and channels, which was an experience that was not really widely available without additional products and configurations, et cetera, in Skype for Business. So take a look at these conversations. Team-based, the ability to leverage SharePoint for file sharing, so I get all of the document management capabilities I need. I can do version control. I can simultaneously edit the documents. I can co-author them, right? And have all that information still on the back-end experience. This I can't stress enough, which I think is the most important and brilliant piece of this solution, and why it is a true enterprise solution versus some of these other tactical ones. So you may or may not be familiar with Slack, for instance. You may or may not look at this tool if you've seen the Teams client and say, that reminds me of Slack. The issue with Slack in a large enterprise, particularly that has maybe a bunch of different sort of user profiles, is you're either all in or you're not a participant in the collaboration experience with Slack. In other words, that's the tool you use, or you're not a participant. With Office 365 leveraging Teams, right, I actually can just go to the SharePoint site that's behind this view, and I'll show you in a second, is actually just a SharePoint site that's being surfaced by the Teams client. I can get to access that document all the ways I did before Teams ever existed if I'm not inclined to leverage the Teams client. So that's really important delineation, right? So there's tons of these third-party applications. I highly encourage you to go out and look at some of those. You probably have many of them in your organization. Um, some important pieces, right? Clearly this is built on Office 365, so scale is not a problem, but neither is compliance, right? Things like HIPAA and all, and now in the government cloud as it rolls out in there, all those same standards of IRS 1075, et cetera, are going to be met there. The ability to get all the same information protections that are the Office 365 platform is built on, e-discovery and audit capabilities requiring multi-factor authentication, secure guest access, which is important, right? All of those things are available right out of the gate because it's built on the Office 365 platform. And again, to revisit this, the actual chat and audio and video conferencing experience is pretty interesting, right? So when we initially rolled out Teams in the Planet tenant, I still kept all of my meetings as Skype for Business meetings. They were already made, many reoccurring ones. I use them. And today, sometimes I've left this meeting, for instance, currently as a Skype for Business meeting, as opposed to making it a Teams meeting. And however, there's all the capabilities for the most part that you'd expect that come from Skype are there, and things like these Skype rooms and Surface hubs and all of that. But there are some UI tweaks that I think are really interesting that I'll share with you a little bit when we do demo. So having the ability to have all that same PSTN connectivity that you got from Skype for Business is available as well on the Teams client. The truth is here that Skype for Business infrastructure is serving as the Teams infrastructure as much as it's serving for the Skype for Business client infrastructure. So all those same capabilities and features, they might be surfaced with a little bit different UI in this new client application, but all of those capabilities that you've learned to leverage and love from Skype for Business in your Office 365 world are still there. So shifting gears really quickly, I just want to sort of talk a little bit through as to what makes sense. So I got this slide from our Evolve 365 team, and thank them very much for this. I can't remember the original origin of it, but it does a great job of sort of visually representing sort of what pieces and parts fall in what thing. So if we look, and I'm going to talk a little bit more drilling down on this, if we look at groups and what comes with a group, right, you see that's the blue line over top of these. There's a huge overlap, for instance, in teams and groups, and we're going to talk a little bit about what to choose when in a second. But this is a good visualization to sort of take away from what's included here. So Office 365 group. What do I get in a group? So when we're clear, right? I'm not talking about Active Directory groups. I'm talking about the group application in Office 365. What happens when I create a group? I get essentially a shared mailbox. I get a SharePoint site with shared files. I get a shared calendar. I get a OneNote associated with the group. I get a planner and a little team site in SharePoint. It's designed to be managed and accessed through Outlook. If Outlook is your primary the primary tool that you spend your day in. It's the convenience of Outlook email and calendars with the collaboration power of SharePoint. And I can access and integrate directly in with Outlook and Outlook Web Access. It can definitely be managed by users, and it allows for external guest access, right? If my interactions are email-centric in nature around collaboration, right, groups are the tool that makes sense for me. You all already have groups in your, regardless of what type of tenant you have groups in your infrastructure today. Teams takes what they're built on top of groups, takes what's in groups, layers a really interesting client experience in front of it. B, whether it be persistent chat or presence, IM, voice, and video integrated into the overall collaboration experience in a single client. I get persistent chat. I get one place to collaborate on all my projects. And I get to create and organize multiple teams, right? I sort of have one place to go that says, here's all the stuff you work on. And we're going to see it in just a second. This was a good visual, I thought, right? The couple of important takeaways. So I know this says Skype for Business, but you can also substitute, right, in the Venn diagram here, that is chat and video, voice and video services, the services that come from that. Because really, once we go to the Teams experience, Skype for Business is sort of replaced with the Teams client, long term, right? But SharePoint is the foundation of both of them. That's where all the documents around collaboration are designed. If my communications primarily happens on Exchange, Groups is a great answer. If my communications primarily happens around instant messaging, voice, video, and persistent chat, Teams is the place for that. A couple of things to take away. You can have a group without a team, but you can't have a team without a group. And that's really that, groups is a foundational piece of things. I can convert a group to a team. I can create a team which creates the underlying group underneath of it. That's how the authentication and user management services are coming from the groups product. But I can have those, but I need that underlying foundation for Teams. Here's just a quick breakdown. I think some scenarios on to which ones you should pick. By the way, I think I should be, open and honest here to say, I think most customers have sort of said, I'm going to create a group and a team regardless. But if I'm trying to decide whether or not I need to roll out Teams at all, I think these sort of scenarios make sense. If I'm rolling out Teams, I think the recommendation is, hey, create the team and let your that automatically creates the underlying group, and just let your organization decide how they want to use it. Right. So here's a couple of scenarios. I'm not going to read through all of them. But, if it's about, a group calendar and scheduling, simply a group is probably more than enough. If I want to collaborate in sort of a new experience with persistent chat and those kinds of things. The other thing, and this gets me to the $6 million question, so people tell me. So Bob, we have widely adopted Skype for Business and we leverage it in our core business functionality. What should I do? And my answer to that is, I think you should sort of proceed on your own time and allow people to organically realize that that the Teams client theoretically can replace the Skype for Business client. If you have not widely deployed and adopted Skype for Business, my recommendation would be that you go to market with the Teams client as your primary client for those types of services. That's Microsoft's general recommendation, and that's been the real-world experience that I've seen. So I'm going to do a quick demo first of a couple of user bits and pieces, and then I'm going to turn it over to Dean Morgan, who's joined us to show some of the administrative elements and things that you can have control on. Excuse me. So I'm going to go ahead and present my desktop. So here is my real Planet Teams client, right? We have a You Already Own It team for our team to work in. I have a bunch of my old X presentations. You can see some of the emails we've sent out, a bunch of documents that we have there. So in the Teams client, the thing that I think makes the experience different that drives people to have a significant interest in this. So all of these teams that are listed here, from Fish Hunter to some of them are customers, and some of them are, some of them are topics, whatever they might be. These groups of people are groups of people that I regularly collaborate around on these topics, right? And so in these groups of people with these topics, I now have one place to go where I can go get, here's my information around state of New York and the customers that I have under there. We just did a presentation around the enterprise cloud readiness assessment. Here is our team information. Here's where the latest and greatest of all those documents exist, right? So I have one place to go to get access to the teams that I'm regularly a participant on. You see there's a whole bunch of them that I'm a participant on. I also, out of that same place, right, I can look and say, here are my meetings and web conferences, and I can join them right out of, I can look at my calendar right out of the Teams client. I can go and have access to, I can go and have access to leverage particular users and add, add them, have one-to-one direct chats, right? I can look at my feed and see all the activity where I've called out or where I've specifically been referenced. All that sort of bubbles up into one. Here are all my recent documents on Teams, all aggregated into a single view. This is what I've been working on in one view. By the way, this carries across OneDrive, SharePoint, and Teams and groups, right? So this is a great sort of one-stop shop to say, this is all my stuff, right? And I can add additional cloud storage references, whether they be Microsoft ones or sometimes even third-party ones like G Drive, et cetera, are actually able to be added in this client as well that I can aggregate. So the idea is building this solution to sort of give me a one-stop landing place for everything but email, essentially, right? So a couple of things, so I can go in here. I can actually make reference. So when we're collaborating on this meeting, getting ready, I can actually call out Jeff Fowler and say, you almost ready? And right out of the persistent chat, even if I'm not an active Teams member, right? I don't have the client installed. I've never been to the darn thing. This actually will notify Jeff, even through email, because I called him out or I referenced him specifically, that you've been called out on a team. Would you like to come over, right? And get in. So it actually pulls people into the experience. So again, if we look at this, there's a couple of other, and I don't want to take too much of our time. I know this is, we try to keep these short and to the point. I could demo this for hours practically. There's just a couple of key pieces that I want to show. So number one is, as I mentioned, behind the scenes here, I'm clicking on that, behind the scenes, that Teams document library that we're looking at is really just a SharePoint site, a SharePoint document library with all the same capabilities that you already have in your tenant today. So if I had any kind of metadata requirements in there, if I had any kind of content retention settings, if I had any of that kind of stuff, all of that would in fact be respected in this infrastructure. So I don't have to worry about that. A couple other key things. Number one is I can quickly do, I can quickly add members to a team just by typing them down. I can, in fact, also, if I look over here, take a team. If I go to the management page, I have a nice little sort of buttoned up interface with everything together. Here are my members. I can add more. If I have channels, channels are the idea of sort of a subdivision of your team. So let's just say I have the state and local government team, right? I might have, everything starts with general, but I might want to say I have an east and west division, and I might want to have separate channels for that so that I can sort of bundle the conversations into smaller groups. Absolutely there. And then I can also add or manage additional apps that I can pop in there. And those are those connectors, et cetera, that I talked about. So with that, I don't want to go too far into to make us run too long. I know we got a couple of things we still have to get to. I'm going to turn it over to Dean to talk about I'm going to turn it over to Dean to talk about some of the admin side of things so that you see that. So, Dean, I'm going to go ahead and give you permission to take over and share out your desktop.
All right, thanks, Bob. So let me go ahead and share this out real quick for you. And let me make sure that you can see it. Can you see it, Bob?
I can. Sorry, I went on mute.
That's okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Teams, and I know that Bob kind of alluded to the fact that Teams has a number of different things involved in it. Email, SharePoint. By the way, my name is Dean Morgan. I'm the SharePoint Architect on the state and local government. And so being SharePoint focused, there's a lot for me to do in Teams. There's a lot for me to work on. And I wanted to kind of go through some of the admin tools that are available right now with Teams and make you understand that this is a work in progress and these will be improving over time. So one of the things that we hear a lot from clients is their need to administer or control what's being done in these various clients, whether it's groups or whether it's Teams or whether it's SharePoint. And so there are some admin tools built in now. And as you can see, I have a demo client here, a demo tenant, and you can see we have the normal set of applications here. We're going to go into the admin center, and if any of you are administrators of a tenant, this will look very similar to you, very just a regular interface. And I'm going to look at the admin centers here. Now, one thing that you'll notice right off the bat is that with these admin centers, there's really no Teams admin center at this point. And the reason for that is that Teams is a mashup of different technologies, and they are working on bringing it to an admin center to fruition for it. So to administer Teams, we actually go to Services and Add-ins, and we click on this, and we'll see here that we have Microsoft Teams right here. So if we click on Microsoft Teams, we then get a set of settings, parameters that we can set for Microsoft Teams to administer our Teams infrastructure. One thing I want to point out to you is right here at the top, this little message about Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center. So they are working on, even as we speak, on a new specific console for Teams and Skype. And we can go there and take a look at that. I want to go through some of these settings first, and I'll take a look at the new Skype Center. So when we look down through the various settings that we have available to us, we can see that we have, the organization chart. We can turn that off. We have T-Bots, Skype for Business recipients who don't have Microsoft Teams. So we have some settings here that we can turn on and off, as well as email integration. And you'll notice here the senders list as far as the ability to allow senders to our channels and to limit who can send into our channels. That could be very important, especially to keep you from being overwhelmed with emails from external users. One of the other things that, again, Bob alluded to, there's, you can add different apps to Team. There's lots of things that you can add on to Teams, and that's one of its strengths, but it's also one of the things that makes administrators kind of nervous. And we wanted to let you know that there are ways to administer that. And as you can see, There are a number of default apps that are in here, and you will be able to turn on and off apps as they become available. So as you can see, we can now turn off external apps altogether, or we can turn off the apps, the default apps in here in this list. And then you can see there are other types of pieces here. The outside things, lots and lots of different cloud services that we can turn off for teams, and that keep us from necessarily allowing just any kind of application to be used in our teams. And really, as an administrator, you want to allow people to use what they need and give them what they need, but sometimes you may see some things as being able to share a little too much data. Again, with the cloud storage, that's one of those things where we look at the cloud storage and we say, do we want people on Dropbox, right? And oftentimes we don't. People are organizations are moving towards Office 365 specifically to start using OneDrive and not use Google Drive or not use Dropbox or not use Box. So these are some things that you may or may not want to consider turning off. Now the settings by user license type, as I understand it, this will be on through May, and after May, you'll be controlling the ability to have teams through your licensing console in Office 365 and not through this setting. So as you can see, this is a temporary. It's a work in progress. The teams and channels, again, it says that you can manage the groups through there, and again, it is a mashup of groups and SharePoint and Skype, and it all comes together in Teams. So there are different places to work on these various pieces. So you can see we also have some things that are allowed, ad hoc channels, private calling, that sort of thing. And again, this references the Microsoft Teams and Skype for Business Admin Center. And I'd like to show you that real quick. And you'll notice if we zoom in to the top here, it does reference admin.teams.microsoft.com, right? So it is going to be a specifically used for the Teams dashboard and the Teams administration. There are very few settings that have actually been ported over yet, as you can see. So there are a few of the various settings that you can set up in here. Now, one of the things that I wanted to point out was the ability or the advent of PowerShell for Teams. So that is out and it is available now, so that you can use your PowerShell to manage your teams in the way that you want to manage them. Now, there are still, as you can tell, there are not that many Teams commandlets out as of yet, but as we move forward, they will be increasing in the number of commandlets that are available for administering Teams. If you'd like a little bit more information on Teams and the relationships between Teams and groups and SharePoint and some PowerShell to help you with some of that, I want to put in a shameless plug for our blog. It is cloudteam.go-planet.com. I'll put it in the chat window as well, so that you can see that, and you can go there and take a look at some of the things that we have on our blogs. So with that, I'm going to turn it over back over to Bob.
Yep.
You there,
And by
Bob?
the way, yeah, I'm here. I'm going to go ahead and bring back the presentation. Chris, so will channels have additional access control? So that's a frequently requested feature. So initially, and I sort of figured this out over the last couple of product releases. So on these sort of non-giant product elements of Office 365. Microsoft's strategy is I start with the easiest to implement, simplest product I can, and force my customer base to get them to push on me to add, to say these are the controls that I need. In other words, if I can get away with 3 buttons and 1 dial, and that's the only thing there is, that's what I'm going to come to market with. And then I'm going to have customers come in and say, well, I need 12 buttons, and here's why, and that kind of thing. So that's a long-winded way of saying currently they're not there. Microsoft's initial intention was that channels weren't sort of the access barrier, that teams were. Right. So if I had 2 different teams if I wanted 2 different channels to have different set of users in them, they really should be 2 different teams. That being said, there's a lot of requests for having, managing access control at the channel level, and I would not be surprised for that to be a feature on the not too distant roadmap. Hopefully that answered your question. Hold on. Whoops. Let me bring up the content. Here is my deck. Deck coming back up. Oh. All right, there we go. So with that, there's a lot of things to decide here, right? What lives in OneDrive? What lives in SharePoint? What lives in Teams? Do I have a team strategy? Am I just going to sit and wait and ride this out? What piece of the puzzle is groups? So we actually have sort of a, oftentimes tacked on to a lot of our other projects, a collaboration workshop. Couple of days, we work end to end to sort of talk about, okay, where do all these pieces and parts fit? What are your strategies? Help you sort of identify types of content and where they belong based on what your needs are. And so that's available to you. We've had customers do things like leverage vouchers to do that, tack it on to other particular projects they're working on. It's not a lot of money. Comes with a pretty thorough deep dive into what and how you can do which pieces. So we'd like to extend that as an offer to you guys, that it's out there and available. And with that, I'm going to shift gears to Jeff Fowler, who's graciously agreed to come in and do his security update for us.
All right. Thank you, Bob. And good afternoon, everyone. For our friends out west, good morning, since it's still early for you. So I want to talk about some of the new things that are available just past month, actually, in the government Azure Government Cloud, with a focus on really security aspects and what's available today. And a few additional comments with regards to Teams and security. As Bob mentioned, they are iterating very quickly on Teams based on feedback they get from the customer base. I was actually talking to them about a month ago or so about Teams and security and compliance and protecting data within there. As of right now, some of the compliance and governance and like things like Azure Information Protection isn't quite there yet for Teams as high level as it needs to be, compared to SharePoint or OneDrive or places like that where we're used to seeing that level of maturity. But this is still a fairly new product for Microsoft. I pretty much consider it the central hub for all things collaboration outside of email. And it's quickly replacing a lot of collaboration things I've used in the past just by having everything so easily accessible across the board. But anyways, you've heard enough about Teams, I'll move on. So the first thing I want to talk about today are application security groups. So these have been available for a little while in the commercial cloud, but they just became available in the in the government cloud. So this brings a wide variety of features and functionality to you that really makes your life a whole lot easier for managing your applications in Azure. So traditionally, you've got your virtual networks, and you can find what you do within the network security groups, which are basically like a set of firewall rules. But you realize that over time, as you start to develop your rule sets, they can get rather large and cumbersome, just like traditional firewall rules, which no one really wants to have to manage those if they can help it. But if you take kind of the concept of global firewall rules for your environment and apply that to the network security groups, and then take your local firewall rules for your local areas and apply that concept to the application security groups, that kind of gets you close to where you need to be with regards to what these things are and how they function. So what it allows you to do is really to define at application level a series of rules that allows you to kind of group different segments of your application, such as these are my web servers, these are my application servers, these are my database servers, and define the rules. Say, okay, anything in this bucket are my application servers, and they're allowed to talk to the web servers out front and the databases out back. What this allows you, though, is to make it so your web servers are not allowed to talk to the database servers directly. So you've got that segregation in place where within the actual network security groups themselves, you can have different buckets defined using application security groups to kind of create this, create the segmentation between the different tiers of the applications themselves. That way, all the really nitty-gritty granular rules of this server with this IP address is allowed to talk to this server on this IP address, and these are the ports that are allowed, and things like that, and allow inbound, deny outbound. And really, all that's captured within the application security groups themselves, and no longer have to code those for every single one of your VMs in your network security group. So this really gives you some great micro-segmentation around your network and your applications. It vastly simplifies the definition of what your servers are and your applications, and it allows you to have a single network security policy on an application basis, on a per-tier basis. That way, as your system scales out, you don't have to worry about IP addresses as much. Or defining one by one, you can scale out and just let the application security group define the rules for your applications, rather than having to do this on a network security group basis, on a one-by-one basis. So moving on, so here's a good example of application security groups and the filtering you can do as things move east to west or west to east. So for example, let's say one of your web servers in the web server 1 application group, application security group, has been compromised. And traditionally, it's a little more difficult to make sure that things don't go where they're not supposed to go, and you've got traversal happening across your virtual networks. Well, by leveraging the application security groups, what this does is it allows you to prevent that traversing from one server to another server in a different application security group. So, for example, web server 1 can never go straight to your databases. It's not going to happen. And what it's allowed to do going to the app 1 group is limited to, say, port 80 and 443. It's not, 1433. It's not 3089. It's not any of the other types of ports and protocols might be available traditionally in standard networks. So it really helps you quite a bit to help protect your networks from, if a server does get compromised from the bad actors traversing your network. Now, moving on to more of a, perhaps a better real-world type scenario where you have your on-prem environment and you've got your ExpressRoute connecting you to your Azure environment, and you've got a branch office off to the side. And let's say you've got someone who has connected to one of your branch offices using a VPN and compromised a workstation and now has access to your network. So normally only a subset of your network is required for this breach, but by isolating the rest of your network and all of our applications will continue to be protected and unreachable from that segment. So for example, going from that branch office, it won't be able to connect to your database servers, for example. They're blocked just straight out. And they're only allowed to really go to the web servers or some of the monitoring machines out there. So it really limits just how far some going across your network, which really does help quite a bit. And let's say, for instance, yes, we are recording this. Charles, to your question. And so, for example, as you see on the right-hand side, you can see all of those application security groups that are nested within the overarching network security group, so that you have just a single line of, these are my web servers and these are my application servers. And that's as detailed as you need to get in your network security groups and rules, which really helps you quite a bit. And then on top of that, you can also have, say, a quarantine VM area where you say, hey, if something does happen to one of these machines, or access to a VM, you want to make sure no one has access to it and you want to cordon it off, you can very easily take that compromised web server, drop it into the quarantine where it no longer has access to any other systems on your network that allows you to do your investigations and make sure if a compromise did occur, what exactly happened, how they did, and how you protect yourself in the future from such events. So there's a few tips and tricks with regards to application security groups. So obviously, take an application-centric approach to your virtual machines. That's really the best approach to how you organize things and how you really go about protecting your network and your applications. Group your VMs logically in those application tiers, such as the web servers and the application servers and your database servers and your domain controllers, and apply necessary rules to those groups, and then don't worry about the rest from there. Don't worry about IP addresses, don't worry about subnets. Let Azure handle that for you. Also, obviously, you'll create your application security groups within your network security group rules. And then Azure will handle all the security and the networking based on your defined rules from there, as you define at the network security group tier, as well as within the smaller application security groups as well. A few rules with regards to application security groups. All network interfaces used in application security group must be in the same virtual network, same VNet. Along similar lines, if your application security groups are used in the source and the destination, once again, they have to be in the same virtual network. So it's a fairly easy thing to comply with, obviously, and it shouldn't be too much of a problem for you. But that's basically some of the tips and tricks with regards to application security groups, which is a fantastic addition that Microsoft has recently made for all of us to make the management of our systems and services a whole lot easier across the board. A few other Azure GovCloud announcements recently. They've now released the app service environment in Azure Government, which is basically it's a deployment of the Azure App Service, and it runs in your Azure Virtual Network. So within there, they're really meant for high-scale network isolation, high memory utilization type scenarios. And the great thing is that you can actually deploy these with an internet accessible endpoint, or with an endpoint on a private address in your Azure Virtual Network. So this makes it really easy to host your line of business applications or apps you only want exposed through like a web application firewall, such as the Azure Application Gateway. So it's really a good way to segment things, as well as get really high scalability for different line of business applications. And the picture on the left shows you like the dashboard for you, showing how your performance is looking, how access is looking, and things like that as well. Another great thing that just became available in the Azure Government Cloud is the Azure Dev Test Labs. So it's basically like a self-service sandbox environment in Azure that allows you to quickly create dev test environments while minimizing waste and controlling costs. So obviously, devs and testers always need to spend a lot of time configuring their self-service environments to make sure they're configured what they need to do with the application, and that takes a lot of time and energy and frankly, resources. You'd rather have them spend their time writing code rather than setting up their environments for the lab. And really, the decision makers, they want to leverage the cloud to improve the efficiencies of the developers while maintaining, minimizing process overhead and managing costs. So what you can do as the lab creator, and this is really a dashboard view of the Azure Dev Test Labs, you can select the settings for your lab, where basically you can set the security settings, the compliance settings, the governance. You can set a standard set of images, custom images for your machines that devs can use. And it allows your users, your developers, to reuse artifacts and run extensions or deploy applications once a VM is created for you. In that way, IT can really help partner with your software teams who are now empowered to work with agility and self-service and really a DevOps mantra kind of model. But in a secure way, in an efficient way, it helps you control your costs. So all good things. So those are kind of the three big highlights I want to mention for this month regards to the Azure Government Cloud Application Security Group is great for managing applications and simplifying the overarching management and rules. The app service environment, which is great for high-scale line of business applications with that need a ton of memory and network isolation at the same time. We can secure it behind a web application firewall. And also the dev test labs, which are a great way to really help your developers move at the speed of cloud while still maintaining decent cost and secure way. That's it for me for today. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Jeff. So we just a couple more things here to quickly wrap up. Just a reminder, for a lot of the topics we talked about, Azure Advantage is an offering from Planet that allows us to, provide managed services of your Azure environment. We've got a number of customers now that are taking advantage of that. I'm not going to drill in. I think many of you have seen this already as you've been to a number of calls before, but it provides you, all the support you needed, ongoing, daily, weekly, monthly tasks to manage your entire environment all the way up to the application itself. And the idea is, yes, it goes everywhere from, hey, I want to take all my servers and do this. And we have some customers that have gone down that direction. But oftentimes we also see, I have this new line of business application that I'd really prefer to have been a software as a service application. And so we'd like to get it in Azure and have somebody else run it and let it do its job for the business and not have to worry about it, right? And oftentimes we're able to provide those kinds of services. So with that, that is all. Thank you. Are there any other questions that are out there that we didn't manage to answer for you today? There was a lot to take in today. I know we ran longer than normal. Going once, going twice. Alrighty, I think that's a wrap. If you come up with any questions subsequently, feel free to email them to you already own it at go-planet.com. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.